The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the hosts and guests and do not necessarily reflect the official positions of NAMI New Hampshire or the organization's funders. All individuals and personal experiences are different. Please connect with your primary care provider or a mental health professional to seek advice regarding any condition you may experience. NAMI New Hampshire does not endorse or advise specific treatments. For 24/7 crisis help, contact the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-8255 or text NAMI to the crisis text line at 741-741 or call 911.
It's time we talked about it. I'm getting tired of living without it. The things in my life just don't make any sense. Each day I wake in the morning, but every day just feels so boring. I don't understand just what I need to change. It's up to you to want to do the things you want to do. And though it's temporary, feeling sad can be so scary. I love the ones who understand me. I never want to feel so angry. I never want to feel like this again.
Welcome to the 603 Stories Podcast, a monthly mental health podcast made by young adults for young adults, where we share stories, make connections, and find hope. Any ads throughout this podcast are not associated with 603 Stories or the 603 Stories Podcast. There will be sensitive subjects discussed during this podcast. Should you need them, the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline is 1-800-273-8255, or you can text the crisis text line by texting 741-741.
Hello, and welcome back to 603 Stories, a mental health podcast made by young adults for young adults. I'm Jace. My pronouns are he, him, his, and I'll be one of your co-hosts today.
I'm Heather. My pronouns are she, they, and I'm your other co-host on this podcast. Just as a reminder before we begin, Jason and I are not mental health professionals, just two young folks who are passionate about mental health and sharing these conversations with you. Today, we have a wonderful guest joining us to talk about the mental health of educators in New Hampshire.
We will also be taking some time to discuss anonymous responses submitted to the podcast team from teachers across the state. But to start, let's meet our guest on today's episode.
Hi, I'm Megan. I am a fifth grade teacher, and I've been teaching for 3 years. I graduated college in 2020, and I think it's important for people to hear and understand the mental health of teachers, because right now teachers are really going through it and have been for a really long time, but it's definitely coming more to light recently. And I think it's important for people to understand that teachers wear so many hats in their one job, and it's different than any other occupation you could have. And it's really important that we take care of our own mental health, because we are also in charge of the mental health of however many students we're in charge of.
Well, thank you so much, Megan, for joining us today and taking time to discuss how mental wellness plays a role in your career. It's a really important topic, and it's great to have you.
Thank you.
We would like you all to understand why we chose this topic for the episode and why we are focusing on just this one profession.
We would first like to state that the field of education isn't the only profession that has changed and adapted because of COVID. But with that being said, the amount of times schools have had to adapt, change directions, or develop entirely new systems to maintain student progress over the past few years is beyond anything I've personally witnessed or heard about in any other profession, with the exception of maybe healthcare, but that would have to be an entire other episode because that would be way too much to discuss right now as well.
Before we dive into our conversation with Megan, we want to share some national statistics regarding education, teachers, mental health, and the student population's mental health. So 75% of teachers have reported that their mental health was worse this year. And 27% of teachers reported that they had symptoms of depression, compared to 10% of adults in other professions.
And only 6% of the teachers that responded to this national survey received counseling support from their school or district this past year. And only 22% reported that they received emotional support.
More than 75% of teachers reported frequent job-related stress compared to 40% of other working adults.
And nearly 25% of teachers said that they were likely to leave their jobs by the end of the 2020 to 2021 school year. That's compared to 1 in 6 teachers who were likely to leave on average prior to the pandemic. So with that being said, there are a lot of gaps in education right now, especially when it comes to taking care of teachers' mental health. So we want to dive into a little bit more about why this might be happening, and what we think some steps are to improving mental health for teachers. So with that being said, Megan, what was it like entering a new profession in the midst of a pandemic?
It was really interesting. It was not at all what I had been prepared for the last 4 years of my college experience. So I started remote my first year teaching in 2020 in September, and I was a third grade teacher at the time. That whole experience, I would have to say remote teaching was easier than teaching now back in person, which I think is a really important fact. And I think many teachers would agree with me on that. I've heard teachers I work with also kind of say that as well. So, getting kids wrangled in, making sure they're sitting at the computers, definitely a bigger project than I had anticipated. But yeah, that first year teaching was full of a lot of different changes. And not only was I a new teacher and new to the profession, but I was new with everybody else to remote learning. And I would say that that was probably the least stressful part of teaching so far in my career, which is crazy to think because it was so different than in-person teaching. But because of everything that followed remote learning, it didn't impact me as much. When I returned to school, I was a hybrid teacher. So my class was broken up into 2 groups, and I would have one group 2 days a week and another group 2 days a week. And then the last day would be remote. I remember the second week of school, being back hybrid, I walked behind somebody into the building, and they scanned their badge on this machine. And I was like, I'm sorry, am I supposed to be doing that? So because of the changes and the craziness of remote learning, I never got training on anything. So I didn't receive regular CPR training, suicide prevention training, training on, what to do during like a violent attack at a school. I had nothing. I received no training whatsoever. I didn't even know that I was supposed to scan my badge when I entered the building in order to show that I was there for the day and to get paid. So as a new teacher, I think we all just fell through the cracks because everybody is so stressed about COVID and the students themselves. So I think that was really hard because I missed a lot of what I would have initially been taught first going into teaching. And I am now just catching up on those things.
What would you say, other than wrangling children, which obviously is a very big stress in working with large groups of kids, what would you say is the next biggest factor that impacts working in person versus hybrid?
I think it was interesting teaching remote because I got to see the students' homes. So you got to see like a little bit more into their lives than you would normally see. I remember I had students who brought their baby siblings to class because they were in charge of taking care of them during the day because their parents would go to work. And so for a couple hours, that baby or that 3-year-old or whoever was sitting on a third grader's lap and was being taken care of. So I think that seeing into the lives of some of these students was really interesting. I'm trying to think of a better word. And I think that was one piece of teaching that I don't now get. It's always a guessing game.
Mhm.
I remember when I was in high school, I wanted to be a profiler, like from like Criminal Minds, like FBI. And it's funny because I'm not that at all, but I also am, because my job is to be a detective, because I have to figure out, okay, why is this student banging on a desk? Why is that student beating other people up? Why is that student not doing any of their homework, or whatever it be? Or why is that student going to the bathroom 20 million times a day?
Mhm.
So it's constant detective work on to figure out, okay, what is making this student do these things? And is it a home thing? Is it a school thing? Is it a personality thing? Do they have mental illness? Do they have a learning disability? So it's a constant guessing game as a teacher. And I think it's nice remote learning. You get to kind of see into their lives, but being in the classroom, you see a lot more of the things that they do personality wise, because they're with other people. Whereas
Mm.
remote learning, they're with other people, but I can mute them if I need to. And I can't mute students in person.
So having a little bit more of control in some aspects.
Yes.
Um, Interesting.
And it
Yeah, I
must
mean,
be draining at times as well, because not only are you constantly thinking about your own mental health and your own mental wellness, but now you have what, 21 other little humans and their mental health and their mental wellness to worry about as well. So I'm just wondering, have you seen programs or curriculum through the schools that are helping the children understand their own mental wellness, or have you implemented anything so that they're more aware of their own coping mechanisms and strategies for taking care of themselves?
Yeah. So something that one of the school districts I worked in pushed was it's called Choose Love. And it was created by the mother of Jesse Lewis, who was a victim at the Sandy Hook shooting. And that program practices compassion, courage, gratitude. I'm trying to think, love, a bunch of other things, and I'm trying to kind of figure out. I'm trying to think of the other ones. There's like 4 words that they follow as a formula to being a better human. So that was part of curriculum. We used a couple other things. I definitely push social emotional learning in my classroom. I think a lot of people have been. I think it's a really important thing before the pandemic, but it's even more important now, because we're seeing way more issues, more physical fights, more verbal fights, students not having the same structure for a year and a half. They don't know how to sit still. And so I think those kind of programs are really important. I implement some of my own activities, things I learned from summer camp or I saw when I was in college, things that I think are important that reflect the other programs that I've been asked to use as well. And a really great one is the zones of regulation, where they kind of identify their emotions based on colors.
mhm.
It's kind of like Inside Out, but that is incredibly important. The only issue is that right now students are also very academically behind. So
Mm.
they're socially and academically behind. And right now, schools are definitely struggling with that balance, because they're trying to push, okay, these kids are 2 years behind in math or 2 years behind in reading. And it's hard to balance that and social emotional learning. And how do you get both of those things at the same time without pushing one out of the way? And that doesn't even include social studies or science or specialists or, a basic read aloud in a classroom. So I think it's definitely creating a challenge. And I think that challenge is mostly being felt by teachers, because they're the ones that are sitting in the classroom and the kids are freaking out and cannot sit still anymore. But we have to continue that hour and a half lesson.
Mm.
And it's creating a difficult time for teachers more than anyone else.
And I think we heard that from a lot of the respondents who took our survey that we put out to New Hampshire teachers. A lot of them were talking about how it's hard to balance all of these things that you have to be juggling at the same time. and still taking care of each student individually as a person, you know? And because of that, trying to cram in so much education into only a few short hours in the day, we got this one response from someone saying, "We went from being heroes to vilified in the span of 6 months. Parents now know how truly hard it is to be a teacher, and yet we are critiqued and criticized at every turn, and it's exhausting." And so just going from remote learning back to in person, it's like, how do we keep pulling these 360s, you know? At one moment, we're saying, okay, these teachers are heroes. How do they do it all day long? But then also, you need to be doing better. You need to be doing more. You need to be fitting all of this into your, 6-7 hour day. But don't forget to consider emotional health, and don't forget to get outside, and don't forget to have snack breaks. And so it's like, we all need a breather. And if we're not giving people the time that they need in order to breathe, then we can't expect them to be excelling and catching up for all of those missed months or years.
Yeah, I think it's definitely, I've definitely seen what that person was saying, like with my own eyes, just, being a remote teacher and then all of a sudden getting all of these expectations thrown at us, and seeing comments on, Facebook pages and things like that with parents critiquing things that their teachers do. And it's kind of heartbreaking because they now know how hard we work, but we're still getting vilified for it.
In what ways would you say you've been supported, whether it's through administration or school district, both through, the struggles of being understaffed and receiving criticism from the public?
Do you want my honest answer?
I guess that's up to you.
So I feel in my past couple of years that I have received support from very specific people. I've received support from people who I know very well, who I feel very comfortable talking to, who are there for me, not because I'm an educator, but because of who I am as a person and because I'm friends with them or I know them personally. I do not feel as if I've been supported by administration and school districts as a whole. And some of that is because they don't have the staff. We were combining classes. So I had 6 extra students for a week and a half because the teacher had COVID, but there's no substitute teachers. So, okay, I went from having 18 students to now having 24 students, and I don't have desks for them. They're at a different place in all of their work, but that's just how it has to be. And that's what we were told. And we just kind of have to go with it. And so it was really hard to just go with it, because then I have 6 extra students who I am now mentally in charge of, who now I have to teach, who I have to figure out what makes them tick. I have to educate them. I have to take care of them. I have to feed them a lot of times. And so.
Was it always the same 6 students that were put into the classroom? Oh.
No, so every time students would be absent, and this was nationwide, like this happened to many, many people. And I know in New Hampshire, it was very, like, everybody had to do it at least once. But when a teacher was out, there wouldn't be a substitute. So they divide the class amongst the other grade-wide teachers, and they would have to take those students that day. The students didn't know until they got there. Sometimes teachers wouldn't know until 10 minutes before the bell rang. So we had no prep time. And again, part of it is there's a shortage. There's no subs, there's no paraprofessionals. But at the same time, you don't see the higher up administration walking through those buildings. It did get to a point last year where we had superintendents, assistant superintendents, people from HR, lunch staff. They were the ones substitute teaching because that's how many people were absent, and that's how they didn't have anybody. So eventually they kind of had to make themselves seen, but it wasn't till the very last, until they really had to.
Necessary.
Yeah. And it's so yes, I was supported by my family, by my friends, by certain coworkers that I became close with.
Mm-hmm.
but overall, I don't feel as if I was supported most of the time.
Did you find yourself being able to set boundaries when it came to work? Because I know that it can be difficult having all of these expectations on you as a teacher, but hopefully you're able to leave work at work and get the rest that you need when you go home.
So in theory, yes. I think my first year teaching, and as a first year teacher, you tend to struggle with setting those boundaries because you're so excited and everything's fun and you want that bulletin board to be perfect and you want to make sure all your copies are made before the next day. And last year was not that way. I would get to school 10 minutes before it started and leave right at the bell when I could because I just couldn't be there anymore. And then I would go home and take about a 2-hour nap every single day because I was so mentally and physically exhausted. So I guess that counts as setting boundaries, except for the fact that I was dying inside. And there wasn't a way to balance because that was the only way. Starting out this school year, I definitely have a better work-life balance. I tend to go in earlier. I like to set up everything, make sure I have everything I need. And then usually, 10 minutes after the bell, my kids are gone. I'm going home because I still need a nap, but just not for 2 hours. So I think I'm getting better at it. But, one of my coworkers this year said one of the first things she goes, I show up right before the bell and I leave right at the end of the day. She goes, because, I've got kids and I've got things to do and, school is for school and that's my job, but other people can leave their job there and I'm going to do that too. And that really resonated with me because there's so many people who can just, yep, okay, I'm going home, 9-to-5 job, time to go. And they don't do any work at home. And that is just not the case for teachers. And I don't think it ever has been. And I think people are now realizing how much work they actually do outside of the school day because there's no time to do anything during the school day.
Now, do you receive any negative feedback or criticism for stepping out, at the end of the day, or, maybe not being mentally present all the time, not saying that you're not present during the school day, but being able to kind of like check out at the end of the day rather than bringing work home?
So unfortunately, I do bring work home. And the reason for that is at the end of the day, I need a break. I'm done. I need a mental, okay, I need to turn it off for a while. So I choose to, at 3 o'clock, go home, take a break, eat dinner. And then after that, I kind of pull out my laptop and say, okay, what are some things that I need to do before I go to school tomorrow? So I do try to balance it out because I'd rather go home and take a break and then do some work than stay late. But I don't think that I think people get it. I think that other teachers are like, yep, I wish that was me, and I think that there are a lot of teachers who have started really setting those boundaries more than they ever have because we're all exhausted.
I'm happy to hear that you aren't getting criticism. I don't want to say I'm happy to hear that. We definitely got some responses talking about teachers receiving negative feedback from admin for setting boundaries. So, I mean, not happy that you have to bring work home, but at least for, being seen in that way.
Yeah.
For, leaving when you need to, or, not doing the, just ride until you burn out.
Yeah.
We've also got a lot of responses from people saying that admin has been really supportive of that. So actively telling people to go home and not check their emails, or if they're there past 4, the admin will stop in and see what they're doing and tell them, hey, get out of here. So it signals of like good work culture, boundaries, and respecting that work-life balance. So I think it's a mixed bag as well for like which district you work in or which
the
school you
culture.
work in. But yeah. But I have been seeing a lot of mixed responses for that.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it depends on the district.
So could you tell us about something that could potentially improve your mental well-being as an educator, or make it easier to prioritize your own mental wellness in the long run?
So first, to prioritize my mental health, I think going to therapy is very important. I went while I was in college. when I started student teaching, and I worked at an elementary school for 3 years as a teacher's assistant. And I remember going to my therapist and being like, do you want to hear what the kids said today? And, he would just take it in strides. And I think having that person to debrief with, whether it's a therapist or a family member or someone else, I think it's really important to have that. I think the benefit of therapy, at least for me, is my therapist doesn't teach. And sometimes I think when talking with other teachers, we tend to feed off of each other's negativity about the profession, because we're all so exhausted and beat, and we're trying to have that hope and that excitement, but it is really difficult. And so having a third party to kind of, give my emotions to, and they don't necessarily have the same reaction that other educators do, is really helpful. I also would say something that has improved my mental well-being in the last 2 weeks, as the first couple weeks of school have started, is the students. Yes, it's exhausting, and yes, it is sometimes heartbreaking and frustrating, and just we're working ourselves into the ground sometimes. But there are days where it is absolutely worth it, having a student share something personal with you and just excited to tell you something, or they're excited about something, or they did something great academically, and you get to share it with the class and you can see the pride in their faces, or they're excited about independent reading or writing, or just literally anything. I mean, I work with 10 and 11-year-olds, and they're hysterical. You hear the funniest things come out of their mouths. And I think that's really important for at least me, is if I'm not happy and I'm not excited and I'm not present for them, I'm not going to get anything out of them academically, and I'm not going to get anything out of them emotionally. And that's my job, is to be there for them. And yes, that is a lot of pressure, but they are absolutely worth it. And sometimes you have to remind yourself of that. But definitely having a new class and a fresh start has improved my mental well-being already, because they are just absolutely amazing. My students are very smart, and making those personal connections with students is the best part of the job.
Do you ever find it difficult to separate your own mental health from their mental health? Like if a student's having a really bad day or something's going on at home, and you can tell it is bringing them down, do you ever find that impacting your own ability to teach the class?
Yes. I am a very sympathetic human being. At least I think so. And so if a student is upset, I immediately feel that, depending on what it is. Or then a student is like, I don't know, talking about, something that happened with their family that was really heartbreaking, or, a grandparent passed away, and you can feel that emotion. And I suck everything up. I'm like, yep, that's my emotion now. I'm going to feel that with them. I'm going to walk them through that emotion. How can we understand it and push forward? And, that's the goal, at least, is to help them. But I take all of that in, which is difficult, because then a lot of times, if it's not good, I'm bringing that home, that mental exhaustion.
What does self-care look like for you other than naps?
Yes.
So when you have that difficult day, what do you do when you walk out the doors?
So yes, I take a nice nap. I try to at least get like one productive thing done after school, so that I don't feel like I'm a couch potato, even though I know that that's, a whole nother thing about my own mental health. But I like having at least one productive thing, so I can say, oh, I did laundry today. So, that's one life thing that I accomplished. And then spending time with people. I'm not someone who can spend a lot of time alone. I need to constantly be around people, even if we're just sitting in the same room doing completely separate things. Being around other people is what brings me the most joy, which is part of the reason I think I became a teacher. And so spending time with the people I love is definitely the best thing that I can do for my own mental health.
Well, I think we are nearing the end of this. So, Megan, if you could just share one more thing, if you could wave a magic wand and change one thing about the way that the education system is supporting or not supporting teachers right now, what would be the one thing that you would change so that you would feel more supported as an educator?
I think that, oh, there's so many things.
You can say multiple. I just didn't want to put too much pressure on you.
Okay, I have two. I have two big
Okay.
ones. One, money, which sounds super superficial and it sounds greedy, but it
Absolutely
is
not.
factual information. A fact about myself is I probably spent from $500 to $1,000 last year on my students. And I can guarantee you that almost every teacher in the United States probably does that, whether it's extra snacks, whether it's decorations for the classroom, whether it's, anything. And we do not get paid enough for that. And I also would have to say that the money could also be great for more supplies and,
But even not just putting it back into your classroom, but a livable wage.
yeah, that'd be nice.
And not
Everyone,
having-
everyone deserves a livable wage and not having the stress of, okay, am I going to be able to pay these bills this week, or am I going to have to like push things off, or what do I cut out this week so that I can pay for the essentials? And anyone working a 40 plus hour a week job, or even like 32 hours a week, I mean, everyone deserves a living wage. And the fact that the teachers in our nation aren't making a livable wage and are doing probably one of the most difficult jobs that there is, that's a lot to process.
Yeah.
Plus everything that you're taking on mentally and physically with supporting the kids all day. Like you're already walking out exhausted and burnt out. You don't need to add financial stress or, financial insecurity on top of that.
Not to mention, you're just, shaping the minds of the future of our nation. Like, no big deal. Just,
Yeah, it's crazy to think this is really sad, but my parents are both teachers and that's not the sad part. They're both great people. They're fabulous. They were incredible teachers. My mom still is, but they were both teachers when I was growing up, and I just remember money always being tight. I remember, there's me and my two siblings, and we went on vacations and we did a lot of fun things, but I remember saving up for family vacations with them, and it being kind of like a fun project. Oh, let's save all this money. But like in actuality, looking back, we were actually saving that money because my parents wanted us to have those experiences. But as teachers, they couldn't easily afford it. And even now, they're still struggling. Now they have, parent loans for colleges, and, they're still living in a house, and they, are still trying to buy groceries. And they always told me not to become a teacher when I was growing up, because I wasn't going to make any money and I was going to be exhausted. And then I did it anyways because that's who I am. But it's heartbreaking that 33 years after my parents became teachers, we're still struggling with the fact that I'm not making a livable wage.
Hearing you say, and I did it anyways because that's who I am, makes me think too that, people become teachers because they care, because they're passionate about what they do. And really, the system is built on that because
We're not
teachers are going to teach. Yeah.
That's like a saying. Yeah, that's a saying teachers use. We don't do it for the money.
Yeah.
Because if we did, we'd all be crazy. The other thing that I remember, the other thing that I would fix, or
wave your magic wand at.
Yes, would be administrators and people in higher positions of power who are in control of education need to get their butts in a classroom. They need to substitute teach at least a couple times a year, and they need to experience the stuff that we go through every day, because a lot of people who are in places of power in education are not people who have ever experienced education. They're like, oh, well, I went to school. Yeah, congrats. You've never been a teacher. Sorry, this is a little aggressive, but I think that they have no idea 4 years of college does not prepare you for the stuff that teaching will throw at you. And I think it is so incredibly crucial that people who control my paycheck and control the decisions about what I'm teaching and how I'm teaching should know what it's actually like to teach.
Even just listening to the teachers, you can tell what you need. You can say what isn't working. It's really about them listening and trusting the folks who know what they're doing.
Yeah.
People know themselves best. If someone's telling you, hey, this isn't working in like my classroom or whatever I'm doing, try and figure out why. Don't just say, oh, well, keep trying. And I feel like that's the attitude that a lot of people are being faced with right now, especially because everyone is so burnt out from the pandemic. We're like, I'm exhausted, and everyone's like, keep trying, you're doing great. And it's like, okay, but it's not about the effort at this point. It's about the infrastructure. It's about our systems that we're using and how can we make them more friendly to everyone that's using them.
Yeah. And I think this, like, people in charge, they're not asking teachers what they need. And I think that's a really important thing too, is we've been telling them, but they're not asking, and then they're not listening when we respond.
Listen to understand, not to respond, and always ask the people what they need and don't assume.
So I'd like to close things out on a bit more of a positive note.
I know, I'm sorry, I went on a rant.
No. It's all important. It's all valuable. Just want to make sure, we're not closing out this incredible conversation on a place of negativity.
Mm-hmm.
So what's one thing that you're hopeful for as an educator?
I'm hopeful that I will inspire students to become the best versions of themselves. And I hope that I can continue, at least I hope I'm inspiring them right now, but I hope I can continue to do that in the future. And I hope that I can be as good of a teacher as I've seen my parents be for the last 24 years of my life.
I love that. Thank you so much for taking the time today to share with us and to be vulnerable. It's really important. It's really valuable. And
go hug a teacher. Everyone listening, go hug a teacher.
Yeah, I know that people will feel validated by hearing what you're sharing.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So, Jace, what is one takeaway you have from today?
My one takeaway from today's conversation is that not just administration, but communities as a whole need to start asking teachers what they need and listening and figuring out how we can support them. Not just saying, oh, you're doing a great job, or like, you're an essential worker, you're a hero, saying all these things, but like actually putting action behind our words and saying, okay, this year I'm going to donate like 100 glue sticks or something like that. But just like, not that that's what's going to change mental health for all teachers, but just doing something that is going to help the classrooms.
Lighten someone's load.
Like lighten someone's load, whether that be financially. Say, okay, teachers, what do you need from me this year? An Amazon gift card? Great. Here's an Amazon gift card. Do you need more substitutes in your building? Okay, who do I know that could be a substitute or is looking for something right now? Just spreading the word and just making sure that there are systems in place to support our teachers so that they don't feel like they're going at this alone. Because honestly, when people say it takes a village to raise a child, okay, well, teachers are raising 21 of other people's children every single day. So how can we be the rest of that village to support the teachers in supporting these students? Heather, what about you?
Well, biggest takeaway is teachers need to get paid more. And that, I think just as a society and as a community, we really need to take some time to reflect on the structures that are in place. Because clearly, whether you're working within it or being a person who's served in it, there's a lot of room for growth. So I think really it's just, taking the opportunity for reflection.
And we can't be afraid of change. Change is what makes us grow as people, and it's healthy. So If we see things within the systems that need to change, it's not a failure on anyone's part. It's only a failure if we don't do anything about it.
Change is good. Well, I think that's all for today. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you, Megan, for coming on. Take care and join us next time on 603 Stories.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks for listening to the 603 Stories podcast, a monthly podcast made by young adults for young adults. You can check out 603 Stories on Facebook or Instagram, or at our website, 603stories.org. Just a reminder, the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline can be reached at 800-273-8255. That's 800-273-TALK. And the crisis text line can be reached by texting to 741-741. Remember, you can make connections, get help, and find hope through 603 Stories.